Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of our participants to our regular Thursday afternoon Innovative Business Advisors webinar. Today will be an interesting day because we do have new information regarding the CARES Act. I imagine this is inclusive to the CARES Act, but more clarification, if you will, from the SBA, specifically regarding PPP loans. We missed seeing all of you last week due to an emergency. We were unable to conduct the webinar last week, but again, welcome back 2 weeks later. Our agenda today, as I said, will include an update on all of the guidance that we've received from the SBA in the last couple weeks. And then we'll open it up for questions. And that really is going to be our agenda for today. So it's possible our webinar may not run the full hour. It really will depend on you and how many questions you have. Remember that this is the Zoom portal. In using the Zoom portal, there's a Q&A dialogue at the bottom of your screen. Type your questions into the Q&A dialogue. I will monitor that dialogue box and pose the questions. We'll try to answer as many possible during the webinar. If by chance you pose more questions than we're able to answer during the webinar, we will have a follow-up, a script, if you will, of the webinar. Everything presented in this webinar will be available on our regular YouTube channel. So do not worry about making additional copies or trying to take notes. We'll have all that available for you. So with that, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you begin the process of updating us.
Excellent. Marquita, as always, thank you so much for your time and effort these Thursday afternoons. We're so very appreciative of all that you do. It's, folks, here we are, 7 months in. Marquita and I were counting down earlier. Boy, we never expected this. You know, when this whole process first started, we thought, well, you know, 2-3 weeks, and we just continue to be amazed. So there was a significant update that happened on PPP forgiveness, and we're going to cover that for you today and talk a little bit more about that. So quick agenda, I'll give you just a quick update on what we're hearing from Congress, and then we're going to go right into the PPP forgiveness application update. And short story of that is there is a new form. So now we have a third different application form to use. And for those sole proprietors, independent contractors, or those that received PPP amounts of $50,000 or less, highly recommended that you use that form. So we'll go over that in detail. But let me get back to the congressional update. So, you know, I think we've all been following the news, and there still appear to be at least 3 different versions. There appears to be a Senate version, and the Senate has said that they may even schedule a vote on that version for next week. We'll see how that shakes out. Then there is also the House version, and then the administration's version. And key players obviously are Secretary Mnuchin, who's doing the negotiations on behalf of the administration, Speaker Pelosi, who is working on the House side, and then of course Senior Senator Mitch McConnell that's leading the Senate side. So in all of those bills, we still understand that there is quite a good amount of clarification for the PPP, including lots of additional provisions for forgiveness on the PPP program. One thing I think that I was reflecting on over the last couple of days as we began to see this new form that is rolled out by the administration, I think it's worth pausing and really considering that, you know, this pandemic that the United States has been going through is unprecedented, certainly in all of our lifetimes. There are very, very few people alive that would have been alive during the Spanish flu early in the 1900s. So, you know, this really is an unprecedented thing. And the federal government at that point in time didn't have nearly the reach or the effect that they've experienced here. And I know if you've been a participant on these webinars with us over the last 7 months, you've heard us talk about many, many times how incredibly proud we are of the administration and the Small Business Administration in particular, the work that they've done. This whole aid program is unprecedented in the history of the United States. Never before has the administration and or the Congress come together to provide this level of support. So really, really amazing what has happened. And I think even when you recognize that, you know, there is a strong disagreement on Capitol Hill between the two parties and what they think the next round of updates should be, even in light of that, you know, the administration, specifically in the form of the Small Business Administration, came out with a new form to help expedite this forgiveness process. So we've marveled before that, you know, the application process was very, very simple. Fill in basically 3 boxes and calculate the amount you want, and the money hits your bank account in a relatively short period of time. Unfortunately, it looks like the folks that designed the tax forms have worked on the forgiveness side of this, and it's much more expedited. But again, I think it goes without saying that we definitely have to be proud of the fact that even with the amount of rancor on Capitol Hill, a lot of this aid has come out. 15 million businesses have benefited from this aid. So that's almost half of the small businesses in the entire country have benefited from this aid. And it certainly has had an impact. I just hesitate to think what would have happened if they hadn't done something and created these programs. So, you know, for all the effort that we've had to put into staying on top of this, I think by and large, you know, we've got a lot to be thankful for. And I think if, as a participant, if you really think back to what the administration and our congressional leaders have done to help the country is really something we can all be proud of. So let me get off my soapbox and dive right into this. There is a new form. The new form is specifically designed for those that received a Paycheck Protection Program loan in the amount of $50,000 or less. It's ideally thought that these would benefit independent contractors and sole proprietors and those small companies that may have had less than 5 employees. So that's the whole purpose of this. It is very concise in terms of the application, really easy to fill out, and we're going to spend a few minutes here going through it with you. It's almost as simple as the application for the money, which is really kind of cool. So nice that they did this. And please be aware that approximately 10% of all PPP loans were for 50,000 or less. So pretty significant amount of the recipients are going to benefit from this. First and foremost, it is now Form 3508S. S is in Steve. So if you'll recall, the long form is Form 3508, the full application form. That wonderful form is about 11 pages long. Then there is the 3508EZ, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But let me dive in specifically to this new form just released this week. So the 3508S really only asks for a few specific pieces of information. You literally put in the number of employees at time of application and time of forgiveness. You provide information on an EIDL advance if your company received one of those, and your EIDL application number if you received an EIDL loan in any amount. And then finally, you just write in the number for your forgiveness amount. That's the amount that you're requesting in terms of forgiveness. Those are the only numbers that go on the form. From that, then there are a series of certifications, and they have simplified the certification process as well. So literally the whole application is now 1 page. And there's only, 4 main boxes to fill in, and then the certification. So much simpler format. I wanted to take a minute and just show you, in comparison to the other forms, how much simpler that is. So again, if you're doing this new simplified form, there are literally only 4 areas where you fill in some information, check the certification boxes, and turn it in. Even on the EZ form, you've got to put in a lot more information. You've got to determine the payroll schedule. You've got to highlight the payroll schedule that your company uses. Then you've got to determine whether you're going to use a covered period or an alternate covered period. Then you've got to detail how you use the money for payroll cost, for business mortgage interest payments, business rent or lease payments, business utility payments. Then the form asks you to total all of those up, so total up the use of the funds. You also put in your total amount of PPP loan received. Then you do an adjustment. You adjust that by making your own calculation as to what the payroll cost requirement would be. And that basically is 60%, as you may recall from some of the clarifications that have happened. And then finally, you put in your forgiveness amount. So a little bit more calculation on the easy form. We were gratified that it all got on one form, much easier than the longer form. And then the longer form obviously has got a whole series of schedules. Then you've got to also do what's called the safe harbor requirements, which means that you've got to figure out if you had a reduction in full-time employees or a reduction in the hours or a reduction in the rate of pay for your people, whether or not that actually penalized you and eliminated some of the forgiveness under the PPP. So long form is certainly much more complicated, and the intent seems to be that unless you're a larger business that received an amount of 2 million or more, which was again a small proportion of the total amount by all companies, then the objective seems to be to make the form as simple as possible. So hopefully this will be an easy reference guide for you, just to see what information is necessary and how those applications need to happen. I will also mention that as a part of the replay, we will post all 3 of the forms and all 3 sets of instruction booklets for the forms. So you'll have all that information as part of the replay. So if you're making some notes while you're listening to this, rest assured you'll have the replay available. You'll have the full overview of the PowerPoint here, and then we'll provide the various forms and detailed SBA instructions for each of those forms. So earlier today, the SBA put on a webinar and provided some detail, and I took the liberty of borrowing their slides because I thought it was incredibly well done and pretty simple to understand. So I want to share some of those with our audience as well. We've had a lot of questions, and hopefully this will provide some clarity on the loan forgiveness basics. So again, there were 4 different ways that you could use the money to cover payroll cost, rents, interest, or utility payments. And as it relates to payroll costs and other eligible costs, you had the additional clarification of being able to determine, are you going to use the money within an 8-week period or a 24-week period? So, there were some wide latitudes that were given to the borrowers in terms of how the funds could be used. But these are the specifics, as you see over on the right-hand side. So payroll costs must account for at least 60% of the use of the funds if you want the funds to be forgiven. You can't have salary or wage reductions of more than 25%. And you need to have maintained your same level of FTEs during the covered period, so that unless you were exempt from some of the safe harbors. So some pretty simple guidelines in that regard. A lot of folks have asked us, what is included in payroll cost considerations. Most important of those is timing. In order to be eligible for the forgiveness, the payroll cost needs to be incurred or paid during a covered period or an alternative payroll covered period. So what does incurred or paid mean? It means that you incur that, as a business owner, you incur the liability when the employee actually produces the work that earns that amount. When you pay them is a little different scenario. So when it comes to the forgiveness application, you're going to have to provide some documentation substantiating that you incurred the expense and that you paid the expense during these particular periods of time. That documentation is detailed in the forms The SBA has made that somewhat easy to do, and it really includes three different pieces of information. First, you can either provide copies of your bank statements, or if you use a third-party payroll service provider like we do at Innovative, your payroll service provider probably has pre-printed forms available for you. So if they haven't already provided those to you, just ask them, and I would expect that certainly all the major payroll providers that we've spoken with do have those forms available. You're going to need those because you're going to need to submit that as part of the documentation to go along with your forgiveness application. The next thing that you're going to need to submit is copies of your tax forms, and those will be twofold. First would be your federal tax forms, which is in essence your Form 941 for the withholding of the federal amounts, and then your state quarterly tax forms as well for if you're reporting on a monthly or a quarterly basis within your individual state. So you ought to be able to have copies of those forms. I know if you report those on some of the portals, you can print the transmittal of those fund amounts and those form amounts, so you'll need to have those as part of your submission. And then payment receipts. So if you've got checks, or if you are using ACH transfers out of your business accounts for those things, you're going to need to have receipts and documentation showing that the money actually changed hands in those regards. So for the payroll side of it, perhaps that could be the easiest form. If you're actually paying employees, you're going to need to show that they were paid, and that you've got copies of statements and or check stubs that verify that. For your other eligible costs, it's a little bit more complicated. If you are able to take a deduction for your mortgage interest payments, you're going to need to supply a copy of the amortization schedule and receipts for the payments. Now, it may not be common for you to have a copy of the amortization schedule at your fingertips. It may be a situation where you've got to reach out to your lender for your business loans and have them send you a copy of the amortization schedule. If you've got a detailed monthly statement from the mortgage on your business, that would probably suffice in terms of laying out what portion of your monthly payment is relegated towards principal, interest, and any fees that may be assessed. For business rents or leases, you're going to have to supply a copy of your lease agreement that details the terms, i.e. what is your monthly rate, and then a copy of your check stub or other payment stub that shows that you made those payments. And then the same thing for your business utility payments. You're going to need to provide a copy of the invoice, and you're going to need to provide a copy of the payment. One question that is one of the most frequently asked questions that we've received regarding utility payments is what is included in business utilities? And let me just once again reiterate that. So it is electric service, gas service, water service, telephone service, transportation service, and internet services for your business. So all of those expenses are included under business utility payments. So quite a lot of information that you've got to put together as part of the document package to go along with your forgiveness application. Let me stress that you make application to your lender, and it's the borrower's responsibility to make application to the lender. It's not the lender's responsibility to come to you and ask you if you're going to provide a forgiveness application. It's your responsibility as the borrower to go to your lender and provide the forgiveness application along with the documentations. And the SBA provided this nice convenient timeline that kind of lays out how the process works, and a couple of other slides that I think will be interesting elaboration. So first and foremost, the borrower has got to make the application and submission to the lender. And as a borrower, you've got 10 months after the end of the covered period in order to make that application. You may have only had a 12-month deferral. So if you think in terms of you use the funds for 8 weeks, that's 2 months. And then the 10 months, well, that covers your full deferral. But if you elect to use the funds over 24 months, and you only have a 12-month deferral, or excuse me, 24 weeks, and you only have a 12-month deferral, and you elect to wait to provide that application, you might be in a situation where you end up making payments before you get a decision. So pay attention to the timelines. The lender has 60 days to review your application and then provide submission of your application to the SBA. And they will do that on the SBA forgiveness portal. And then once the SBA receives that and issues acceptance to the lender, then the SBA's got up to 90 days to review that submission from the lender and provide a decision. So, you know, from a longest period of time, from the time you make application, you could be looking at 5 months before you even get a firm final decision. Understand that the lenders really only have this, while this says lenders have 4 decision points, there's really only 3 decision points that the lenders have. First off, the lender will agree to approve it in full, or they could agree to approve your forgiveness application in part, or they could deny your forgiveness application. The fourth here talks about denied with prejudice, and that just means if the SBA receives all the information and for whatever reason decides to do a loan review on your particular loan, then it will move into a denied without prejudice scenario while that's going on. So I would expect that your lender would probably give you what their decision is going to be in a fairly timely basis. If you're filling out the application, you make sure that your math on the application is correct. And if you use the autofill application that the SBA provides for you, it helps you in that regard. Again, you want to make sure your math is correct on the application and that you have the required documentation. It looks like it's going to be pretty easy to make a decision in that regard. So I would expect your lenders will probably let you know pretty quickly whether or not you're going to be applicable for full or at least partial forgiveness of your loan amount. So once the SBA makes a decision, then they've got to immediately notify the lender. And what happens is the SBA will actually transmit funds to the lender to cover that forgiveness amount. So if the lender says that they recommend that you should be forgiven in full, and the SBA accepts that recommendation, then the SBA is actually paying the funds back to the lender to pay off your amount. And then the lender has a responsibility to communicate that back to you as the borrower. So I just wanted everybody to understand exactly how that's going to work. Couple of other main points of clarification that we're getting asked all the time. First off is economic injury disaster loans. So if you received an economic injury disaster loan advance, your forgiveness on the PPP will be reduced by the amount of the advance. And that is the way the original CARES Act legislation was drawn up. We understand that there are some provisions in the pending legislation that could potentially change that, but frankly, until the next series of legislation gets passed, none of us are going to know whether or not that ever happens. But as of right now, your forgiveness application will be reduced by any EIDL advance amount that you received. So please be aware of that. Also, if in fact your loan is not forgiven in full, and potentially that could happen because you had an EIDL advance, keep in mind that the lender is going to have to come back to you and notify you of that in a very timely fashion, and then the lender will continue to service the loan, and you'll have the opportunity to then begin making payments on that loan. Remember, there's no prepayment penalty. You can pay it off quickly if you so desire, but you will have that resulting loan term that is still outstanding for you. Two other quick things. Some questions came up. Is there a maximum number of documents that can be uploaded with your application? The answer to that is no. You can upload whatever number of documents you need in order to substantiate your application for forgiveness. and make sure that the numbers in your substantiating documents match what you're putting on your application. And the SBA has become quite flexible in saying that you can upload documents in all kinds of electronic document formats, which is kind of nice. The other thing is, just says here, which version of the forgiveness application should lenders use? Well, actually, there's 4 options for lenders. Lenders can use any of the now 3 different forms: the 3508, the original long form, the 3508EZ, the shorter form, or the 3508S, which is now the shortest of all forms. In addition to that, lenders have the option of creating forms of their own, but it has to include at least the information required on the SBA form. So there could be potentially a lender-specific form out there as well. And then there's some general process FAQs out there, a couple of which I wanted to highlight here. Can documents be added to a forgiveness submission after it is submitted? They are saying no. Once the forgiveness application and documents are loaded into the SBA portal and the SBA portal accepts those documents, basically you are deemed to have made application. If you find that there was some error in either your application or the submission documents, you then have to apply to withdraw your original application and you can reapply. So you cannot amend an application once it's been done. Next common question is, should you do the math and reduce your forgiveness amount by the EIDL deduction? And no, you don't do that. That's part of the SBA's responsibility. And actually the SBA is going to just go verify that you actually received those advance funds, because if you remember back, there's probably a lot of people that applied for advance funds that didn't get advance funds because the funding ran out for the advanced portion of the EIDL grants. So you're going to want the SBA to actually make sure that your application information is correct. And then finally, if your loan review decision is denied, can you appeal that decision? And the answer is yes, the borrower can appeal the decision. The lender cannot appeal the decision. So remember, if the lender says that they are recommending full or partial forgiveness of the loan, but for whatever reason the SBA comes back and renders a different decision, you do not appeal to your lender. You have to appeal as the borrower directly back to the SBA. So a couple of small but really important differences out there to be aware of. So with that, Marquita, that's the update. A lot of information, and we took about half the time, but hopefully that was concise enough for people to understand.
Really, that was a really good review, Steve. And we do have one question. Christy asks regarding proof of having paid or used the funds in the correct categories, and she's speaking very specifically to rent checks rather than obtaining a receipt from the landlord. Is there any guidance in what you've seen that says it has to be a receipt, or can she use her canceled checks?
No, canceled checks. Yeah, canceled checks are acceptable proof. That's correct.
Okay, so as of now, that's the only question we have. If anyone else has a question, please quickly type it into the Q&A box. Now, this is really interesting, Steve, and I'm going to go back and ask you a question that's probably been asked several times over the course of the 7 months, because we've been talking about this, or at least 5 of the 7 months we've been talking about the forgiveness process. And now that we have all of these varied forms, what are you hearing? And I know it's a little quick because some of this just came out today even. I mean, some of this information was only shared a few hours ago today. What are the lending institutions saying? Are the gates open to apply for forgiveness, even using the new S form, the new short form, or do we still have to wait for our lending institutions to tell us they're accepting forgiveness applications?
Excellent question. And what we have heard is that many lenders are now beginning to accept lending applications. The SBA, even though they opened the portal some weeks ago, really was not processing any applications up until 2 weeks ago. So a lot of lenders were saying, don't even bother to apply yet because the SBA is not processing, so there's no point in us putting it into the portal. We're understanding now that the SBA has begun to process the forgiveness applications. They're not waiting on Congress to act at this point. That is one side of that. There are still banks, and I've talked to one bank in particular that is still recommending that folks wait. And part of that is based on the fact that the National Bankers Association and the National Association of Government Guaranteed Lenders have all strongly lobbied and advocated for more clarity regarding forgiveness and potential rules regarding forgiveness. And those are all elements of the various bills that are floating around Capitol Hill. So we think that ultimately, if another HEROES Act, as some people have referred to it, or another, round 4 of the CARES Act gets passed on Capitol Hill, it's more than likely going to include something because it has the banking community's strong endorsement for including something along that line.
Good, good. Okay, we have a question from Matt, and he's asking regarding the EIDL loan, the core loan, not that grant, not that initial grant. Does the loan reduce the PPP forgiveness amount?
The loan does not. The loan does not. Only the EIDL advanced grant. So if you'll remember how that worked, if you were an early applicant for an EIDL loan and you check the box, requesting an advanced grant, that advanced grant got directly deposited into your business account. But your loan documents that you received when you received the balance of the EIDL funds did not include that advance amount. It only included the second tranche, if you will, the second release of money. So now the way the SBA is potentially getting some of those funds back is through reduction of forgiveness on the Paycheck Protection Plan loans.
Okay, good. Okay. Now, from an anonymous attendee here, this question, and I'm not sure I clearly understand it. I'm going to read it as written. If someone is receiving a payment from the lender on the PPP loan, do they pay it now or do they wait for the forgiveness? I don't understand that question, and you might want to clarify more. So at this point, I am not aware that any PPP loan could possibly be in place long enough to have gone into the payment process, right?
Should not have been.
Okay.
All loans automatically had 12-month deferrals. So I think the earliest loans came out in early April. So it shouldn't be, the earliest payments should be sometime in April of next year. Now, Marquita, as you and I both know, if you're selling your company or making a transitioning your company to a new owner or something, you may have had some payments and so forth that were made as part of that process. But those, I would say, those are extraneous processes, not normal processes that most companies would have worried about.
Yeah. And another thing, I'm going to bring another topic up, and boy, this can become very complicated as we begin to look at all the eventualities of what could happen now that we're applying for forgiveness on the PPP loan. But let's say, and this is a real situation for me. I have an approved EIDL loan sitting out there that I have never accepted. It's sitting in approval state. And again, lots of pressure from the SBA to go ahead and take the money.
They want you to sign, right?
Exactly. They want me to sign. So as I go through the PPP forgiveness process and I determine that all of my PPP loan is not forgiven, could I potentially transfer that balance to an EIDL, which I think has a better rate than the PPP ultimate rate? What are your thoughts on that?
I think you may have the opportunity to do that. So that was one of the options that was originally available. So it depends upon what, you're going to have to look at
The
what
rates.
what the rate would be on
Mhm.
the PPP at that point. Here's another thing that I thought about that, as you and I both know, for a lot of companies, this is, I shouldn't say a lot, but I would say a very regular occurrence is a company may be renting space or leasing space from a landlord, and it may have been in the same place for a long period of time and doesn't have a current lease document. They may just have a handshake agreement whereby they're just, paying somebody rent. In that situation, they're going to have to go get some form of documentation from the landlord that substantiates that that was in place before February, right? And they may have to, if they can't provide, a lease copy that was signed before February 15th, there may be some additional hoops that people are going to have to jump through to be able to claim rent or lease payments in those situations. And as Marquita, as we've seen routinely, businesses that are in the same place for a long period of time, when they, when we get involved with them and they're doing transfers or what have you, and they don't have a lease in play,
Mhm.
that's not an unusual occurrence.
Sure, sure. Christy asked the question. So she has an EIDL loan. It was approved. I don't know what the date is on this, the time frame, but she has already received repayment coupons for her EIDL loan.
Mm-hmm.
But the coupons state that she does not have to make a payment. Her question is interest accruing? What she thinks she's still in deferral.
Yeah, she is in deferral. So
Okay.
yes, that is true. And we've heard that from many of our clients that the SBA, once you've accepted the EIDL loan, they have begun sending monthly reminders out that your first payment will be due in, let's say, June of next year, for the sake of example. So yeah, we've seen that regularly.
Yeah, and I see how that could be confusing, because you would think that you would get no kind of a message until it's due. Okay, makes sense. Okay, I don't see any other questions queuing up here. Let me take a look. So yeah, it looks like all of our portals, the questions are answered. So any comments? We're at 3:38, so about a 40-minute webinar today, if in fact no other additional questions come into the portal. Steve, I'm going to give you an opportunity to just do a quick wrap up, and then we'll say goodbye until next week then.
Yeah, I'd just like to remind folks that, remember that if you're the owner of the business, you were capped at 2.5 times average monthly compensation, up to, and if you did it on a 24-week period, up to a maximum of $20,833 per individual. Okay, so if you routinely paid yourself more than $100,000 a year as the owner of the company, the maximum you could claim back is $20,833, right? If you were using the 8-week period, you got to remember that that maximum amount goes down to $15,385. So, it pays to really take a look at, is the 8-week period or the 24-week period a better use of the funds for you specifically and for your business? So as a business owner, if you haven't sat down and done the math in that regard, reach out to us. We'll help you with some of the specifics on that. But it can make a pretty significant difference. And there's just the owner alone. And if you have highly compensated individuals in your company, it amounts to about $5,000 per individual from the payroll cost perspective. So it has a big difference whether or not you're going to use the 8-week period or the 24-week period. And it's in the business owner's best interest to sit down and do a couple of different scenario role plays with their loan and their costs and figure out what's in their best benefit, if you will.
Okay, great.
So as always, we'll stay on top of this stuff, and we'll be back again next week if there's any changes.
Okay, and again, thanks everyone for participating. Expect that you will receive an email with links to our YouTube page, and you will have access to this recording and additional follow-up material related to the questions and the PowerPoint slide that was used here today. So again, thank you for participating. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Take care.